I've made quite a few things that could shoot bombs in Besiege, but recently I had a quirky idea. I wanted to try making some sort of floating ship that can attack targets from way up in the air. This orbital bomber can't actually orbit though, so first I need a method to make it hold its position in the sky. Now for that, you can see here what I'm doing is adding on some logs to the starting cube, and I'm building it up in this plus sign formation. On those arms, I put down some water cannons and I turned up their thrust. And you can see here when I turn it on, I get a little bit of thrust, but it's not enough to fully get me off the ground. After turning them into steam cannons though, the results are quite a bit better, and this is already enough to let me hover. It's a little unstable though, and it's definitely bending, and you'll notice it also starts drifting to the side, and to fix that first problem, I braced everything together to make it a bit more rigid. After that, I added on an altimeter, and this is to automatically turn on and off the water cannons to keep me at the same level. Once I put that in place here, I set the height to 14 meters, and I wanted to give it a test. And while this was working, it was bouncing quite a bit here. Ideally, I'd have some sort of system that automatically limits my movement so that I stabilize right around the point that I want, but you can see it's not too bad already, and with more weight on it, I was hoping it was going to improve. And after that, I deleted some logs that were unnecessary, and with all of this done, I wanted to start working on the cannon part of this. Now, I was thinking for a little while what I wanted to do for a cannon, and you can see I added in 2 logs, and I also added on this long rail. After that, I put in this half pipe here, and I stretched it out a ton. This is to create a nice smooth surface for me to launch missiles from. And you'll notice I put in a log in the back, and I'm putting in some springs. I wanted to use some sort of ballista-like system to fling the missiles down right towards their target. And after turning up the spring strength, I wanted to give it a test here, and you can see it's not bad. It wasn't going super fast though, and I wanted to improve that. Now, turning up the spring strength doesn't really affect that, but moving the log further back actually does make it contract a lot further, and that gets me a lot more speed. I also replaced the log with a ballast to keep down the weight as much as possible, and I added in a ballast to the front as a projectile. And as I shoot it here, it goes pretty far. So next, I selected everything here and I rotated it 45 degrees. This should get it to go as far as possible, and giving it a test, I got quite the launch here. Now, especially since I'm going to be firing straight down with this cannon, this should work super well, and with that, I wanted to start working on the actual missile. You can see here, I'm adding in some fins to the back, and I'm putting in a grabber in the front with a bomb. This locked as my warhead, and with this in place, I wanted to put it on the machine and give it a test. Now, when it's firing straight, it wasn't the best, but rotating it up, it already seemed to be quite a bit better, and I got a pretty solid launch. And again, the plan is to shoot this almost exclusively straight down, so if I have enough power to get it over this mountain, it should be good to go. So next up, I actually did rotate it here, and I wanted to try it out. And you can see when I shoot it, it flings the missile straight into the ground, and with that amount of speed, I should be able to precision hit any target. I was curious though if I could get even more speed on this, so see what I'm doing now is actually moving the springs further down so I get more contraction. Trying this out though, I got some very mixed results. Sometimes it seemed to fling it down pretty well, but other times it would slip off or push it off to the side, and it really wasn't working perfectly. Since this was mostly working though, I wanted to add on my propulsion system next and try getting this up into the air. So you can see here, I started putting in some logs and connecting everything together. After I did that, I also added in some braces to add a little more rigidity. It still seemed to be able to shoot straight through the middle, so with that at least looking mostly good, I wanted the mechanism to automatically be able to retract the springs. For this, you can see I added in a rope and winch, and after I shoot, I'll be able to pull back in the ballast, and that'll allow me to reset for a second shot. And now finally with that done, it's time to work on the wheel. This is probably one of the stranger parts of the build, but it actually does have quite a few uses. You can see here I'm adding in a bunch of logs, and after that, I also put in a spinning wheel on top. Once I had this, I braced all the logs to it and braced them all together. Now this wheel is going to serve a couple purposes. The main one though is going to be stabilization. Since the wheel is going to be spinning at a reasonable rate, it's going to make it very difficult for this device to tilt one way or the other, and it's going to add a lot of stabilization. These 4 logs didn't have that much mass though, and trying this out here, it didn't seem to do much at all, and it still just ended up tilting to the side and falling down. down. So to fix that, you'll notice now I'm moving logs much further out and I'm copying them in an arc. After I got these all in place here, you'll notice I'm filling the outside arc with more logs. This is going to create a large amount of mass very far away from the center, and once I spin it up, I'll have a very large moment of inertia. Trying to support this though was going to be very difficult, and you can see here the wheel just completely disintegrated. Now I figured here more braces should get me more stability, so after connecting everything up here, I wanted to give this another test. This time the wheel mostly held together, but the moment I tried to spin it up, all the braces instantly just broke off. Now to fix that, I turned down the speed of the wheel quite a lot here, and you'll notice now it is going a lot slower. At the very least though, it's holding together and is spinning a little bit. So at this first wheel mostly working, I wanted to copy in a second one and add that on top. Now the reason I wanted to add 2 wheels was for 2 reasons. The first one is that I'll get more stability out of it, but the second one is that if I have it spinning in the opposite direction, it'll cancel out the torque from the first one so the main device doesn't start spinning. And after moving that up in place here, you can see I added on another spinning wheel and I started to brace everything to it. And once I got this in place here, it did seem to start spinning, which wasn't too bad, but that's when I noticed another problem. This wheel was starting to oscillate a tiny bit, and you can see it here. At first, I wasn't too worried about this, but it just kept getting worse until eventually it just completely exploded. Now, even more concerningly, the bottom wheel, which was working perfectly, also started to oscillate like this, and I really wasn't happy to see that. Now, I was guessing at first here, if I add on more braces to the wheel, it should make the whole thing a lot more rigid and prevent it from bending. It's also very important that these braces go over a much longer distance than the ones did previously, so they brace the pieces of the wheel that are going to bend against each other. Now, also tried experimenting with replacing the power source of the wheel with steam cannons. This seemed to work fine, but one thing to keep in mind here is that I have 0 gravity on right now, and that's why nothing's falling apart. I'll have to address bracing this up better in the future, but right now you can see I still have the wheel oscillating and completely exploding on me. I'm guessing Besiege doesn't like having this many pieces loosely connected with braces, and it seems to just completely get out of control. Now, one thing I was thinking is that 0 gravity might have been contributing to this, and once I turned it off here, the bottom wheel did stay together, but the top wheel fell straight down. Now, I was figuring that this shouldn't be too bad of a solution, and you can see now I actually copied out the propulsion system, and what I'm doing is rotating it 45 degrees and adding in more cannons. This will give me a lot more thrust, and once everything is braced together here, you can see also what I did is copy the support system from the bottom wheel onto the top wheel. Ideally, this should prevent it from falling down, and it actually did seem to work here. Now, there was still a little bit of wobbling in the wheel, so to completely stop that, I added some braces going from one side of the wheel to the complete opposite side. This did a great job of holding it together, and after that, I never had a problem with the wheel oscillating apart ever again. So with these wheels fully working, next, I wanted to try keeping them in the air. For this, I changed the power of the water cannons from 4 times to 40 times. This was a very bad idea though, because you'll notice they immediately just shot off the machine and went into the air. So to keep them on there, I tried bracing them up a lot better, but even after adding on like 8 more braces, they still just instantly shot off and broke away. So I went ahead here and you'll see I actually deleted a lot of these parts, and I wanted to start with a slightly different design. This time I wanted to keep the water cannons a lot further away from the center, and that was for 2 reasons. The first one was that there's a lot better attachment points further out, and also I just thought it looked a little bit better. But you can see here I started putting on some cannons to the ends, and I'm using 3 on each end. That means that I need a lot less stress on each individual cannon, and also added on a fireball to heat them all up. And you can see here it did sort of shoot off, so with a bit more bracing I tried this again, and it was a little better than before, but that's not really saying much. It still just broke off immediately, and I was gonna need to do a lot more bracing. But with that done here, I also changed the water cannon's force to 15 times. For whatever reason, this ended up being the perfect number, and you can see here they're not shooting off, and letting it go in the air here, I'm actually starting to gain height. Now, I don't have any stability at the moment though, and that's why I need to start spinning up the wheels. And you can see here, I actually did get them spinning up in opposite directions, so with that looking good, I wanted to try shooting this off, but it still seemed to tip over a little too easily, and the wheels just instantly broke apart. Now, I knew that I was gonna need to get the wheels spinning up a lot faster, and that's where the steam cannons come into play. Now, I tried these out before, and the reason I didn't stick with them was that it was a little annoying to work with, but with this, you can see I get them going up a lot faster than before. Looking down on it, it also creates this nice little pattern with the weaving steam, and I really like the look of that. And finally here, I wanted to try this out as it's floating. If you look at the wheels, you can see that as I'm tilting, the wheels are actually starting to bend. That's a good thing, because it means that the wheels are fighting that rotation, and they're passively helping me stabilize. Now that's great to see, and that should help me out a ton, but I also noticed that it would slowly start to tilt every once in a while, and to address that, I was gonna need a tiny bit of active stabilization. To build this, you can see I'm putting some logs in the top of the machine, and I put some ballast on the end of those. Now on those, I put some more water cannons, and I wanted to put on some angle meters. These will detect when I start to tilt a little too far, and if I do, they'll fire off the right cannon to get me back up to level. But giving this a test now, while it was turning on the correct cannon, it also broke off immediately here, and that's when I realized I could also just rotate these water cannons 90 degrees and get a much more efficient design. So of course, with that done, I'm giving it a test now, and trying it out, it seems to be working well. The wheels are keeping it very, very still, but every once in a while, you notice the cannon shoots off and gets me back up to center. Now after that, I wanted to turn my attention back to the cannon and figure out a way to aim it. Now my first thought was to move the blocks in the bottom back and forth, and by doing that, I'll adjust the direction that the missile shoots. This seemed super simple, but trying this out now, it was surprisingly difficult to move it back and forth without just ripping off the braces and completely breaking the machine. So next, instead of moving the bottom of the missile launcher, I wanted to try moving the top of it and actually move the missile before I fire it. This seemed simple enough to do with pistons, and you can see after I attached a stack of these on here, I tested it out, but it immediately seemed to break off as soon as I tried to push it forward. With less pistons, I gave it another test here, but this was so floppy, it wasn't really going to be useful at all, and I wanted to try a winch system instead. You can see now I'm using 2 winches on this block, and by adding on 2 more on the opposite side, I'll be able to have it ride back and forth and adjust the direction that I'm shooting. This seemed to be working fine here, and after tensioning up the ropes, I got a system that wasn't too bad. Now, even after attaching on the missile, it didn't seem to weigh it down too much, and I still got some pretty decent movement. So I went ahead here, I moved it on the cannon, and I wanted to try this out. And after tensioning this up here, I tried moving it back and forth, but I noticed that the missile itself wasn't tilting. This is a big problem because as I try to shoot it, it just randomly goes off or just ends up disintegrating. So to guide it better, I was thinking maybe if I added on more fins, it would keep it going in the right direction, but this still seemed to have the same problem, and as I pull it down, it just immediately falls apart. This system was also getting so complicated that reloading it was gonna be almost impossible. You'll see it built off to the side here at the wheel and a couple of grabbers. Now I get this up to a pretty good speed here, and by adding on some bombs, I can throw them off at high speed. This is good, but I didn't like how the bombs were going in opposite directions. I was thinking though, and I was pretty sure that I can make them all go in the same direction. So you'll notice now, I added on more grabbers, and I added on an angle meter. This is gonna sense the current rotation of the wheel, and once I reach the right point, it'll throw off the bomb and make it go in a very specific spot. This seemed to work well at first here, and I added on 4 more angle meters. Now ideally, they'll all sense when I reach that same spot, and when I do, they'll throw off the bomb. There was one small flaw in this design, and you can see here at first that 2 of the bombs go in slightly different directions. I'll explain a little bit more on this in a bit, but you can see here that the last 2 bombs fly off over to the right, and they're grouping very well. The other thing I liked about this design is that it's so simple, I could just keep copying it over and have more banks of bombs. Here I have them all firing at the same time, but in theory, I could stagger their firing. Now next, I wanted to create a system to aim the bombs. Right now, I just had a fixed angle on the angle meters, and that means they always go in the same spot. By adding a steering hinge here though, I'll be able to adjust the rotation of the angle meters, and that'll either make them fire later or earlier in their rotation. And you can see now, giving it a test, I'm able to fire these bombs straight down into the ground, and that was looking pretty good. The only problem though is I actually don't know where I'm aiming them at all, so I'm going to need a system to tell me what's going on. For that, I copied in another one of these steering hinges and I fixed it in place. After that, I added on a rod to it, and this is gonna tell me where I'm shooting. And you can see now, as I move the angle meters, it also moves this rod, so this should work pretty well. Unfortunately though, it seemed to be randomly shooting off, and I couldn't figure out what it was doing. For many reasons I'm not gonna get into though, what I needed to do was to reverse the direction of this rod so it goes opposite the angle meters. After this, I'm able to shoot off the bombs in the direction of the rod, and that was looking great. Now lastly here, I wanted to add in one more angle meter, and this is gonna let me get that fourth bomb going in the right direction. Now the reason that it was misfiring at all is that there's a certain range that the bomb can fire in, and one of them is always gonna be slightly in that range when I try to fire off the first bomb. This last angle meter though is gonna suppress that output until it spins around again, and you can see here I have all the bombs shooting off in the same direction. So with that looking great, I copied over 2 more banks of bombs here. I also did a little bit of messing around with the logic to have that work. And with everything put together here, I started to brace it all up to the body. This is actually quite a bit simpler than I thought, and you can see now I'm able to fire off each of the sets of bombs at different times. So with the fire mechanism working great, next up here, I wanted to add in some panels and finish up the look. Already, I was kind of going for that alien spaceship vibe because I didn't really know what else to do with this, but it actually hid things pretty well once I did this, and also curving the panels helped out a lot. Now, unfortunately, this was extremely heavy, and trying this out, it fell down and immediately just crushed everything. I tried adding on more braces, but this did not do enough, and it still just broke everything. I realized at this point though, if I turn off collision on the panel, it also makes it pretty much massless, and this helps out a lot. So with everything holding together here, I'm still able to fire off all the bombs, so overall, this is looking pretty solid. The last thing I needed to do though was add on some movement. For this, I started by adding on some steam cannons to the sides to push me around and also rotate me around. Now with the amount of mass that I had to spin around, I knew this thing was going to be very slow, but at the very least, it should have some amount of propulsion, and it started to look okay. The steam cannons that I added to push me back and forth though were a bit too strong, and I was starting to tilt far too much. So to fix that, I added on a flying block here to push me forward, and this seemed to slowly move me in any direction that I wanted. Now overall, I'm actually super happy with the way this thing turned out. Aesthetically, it's pretty much exactly what I wanted, and I'm super happy with just how stable it is in the air. It seems to bounce up and down very little as it starts to hover, and that's better than I could have asked for. Now I was hoping that it moved back and forth a bit faster, but it is pretty well compensated for by the fact that the bombs can shoot off at a very wide range. You can see here in some of these final shots, I'm shooting things quite a ways off, and especially the higher up I go, the further I can shoot. And also the higher up I go, the much harder it is to aim things since the arcing gets a lot more intense, but it still seems to get the job done pretty well here. And again, I think this thing's pretty cool. But make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. If you have any other ideas for future builds, make sure to leave them down below, and otherwise, till next time.